Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Boost Team Productivity via Team Belonging. Just a couple of announcements before we begin. First, we invite you to submit questions or comments in the meeting chat. The presenters will do their best to address these at the end of the session. Second, this session is being recorded and may be posted online or made available for on-demand access. Boost Team Productivity via Team Belonging will be presented by Terry Vetter, Talent Development Program Manager, Department of Administrative Services. Now, she will have co-facilitators that will be introduced during the session. And now, please, a warm welcome to Terry and her facilitation team.
Welcome to our session, Boost Team Productivity via Team Belonging. My name is Terry Vetter. I work for DAS in the State Human Resources Division. Today I'm serving as a moderator for our discussion about the importance of psychological safety in the workplace and how by establishing and building on that sense of safety in the workplace, it works to create that sense of belonging. Today, I've got three awesome people with me that are going to be sharing their ideas and their examples and their expertise with you. The first is Carolina Thatcher, and she works for BWC. Next is Leslie Hanna, who is a part of the EAP team. And then finally, we have Greg Bolyard, who is also part of BWC. So as we're talking today and getting started, we want to begin with some ground rules. And we're not saying that we need ground rules for today's session, but we're wanting you to think about the ground rules that help to make your team successful. So Carolina, what are your ideas about ground rules?
Yeah, in sessions like this and in any other session or training, it's really important to be fully present. We are sharing these as an example that can work in your teams, but also here as well. Being fully present is very important. The respect for each other, trying new things, and having fun. Even though this is a recording, you can also notice that all the language and these ground rules is positive. You're not going to see the word no. It doesn't say don't do this or don't do that. It just shares with the expectations that we have with the audience or in any team meeting. What happens, Leslie, when things like this don't happen? When don't work like this way? What do you think?
Yes, Carolina, I was just thinking that when I see the be fully present, that always indicates to me participation. And I've been in work groups and cultures where people don't want to talk. It's a culture of silence. And silence is a sign of a lack of safety. There's no psychological safety for those participants.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, Leslie. I'm wondering in these cultures where people are silent, what is causing that? Why do people not share in teams? So sometimes I think it could be to avoid conflict. People are afraid to say something that might be seen as disagreeable with what somebody else has shared. Sometimes it could be a learned behavior. So especially if the leader or leadership has in the past not welcomed ideas, or perhaps somebody's even been called out or punished because of something that they shared, that's something that will cause people to think twice before they want to share or share themselves. And sometimes just having that understanding that people's opinions are wanted and are necessary to get the best results from the team can be helpful. The CEO of Netflix had said, and his name is Reed Hastings, that he not only encouraged people to share because he was experiencing this culture of silence at Netflix. But he went so far as to say it is disloyal when you disagree with an idea and you do not express disagreement. So by withholding, you are implicitly choosing not to help the organization. So I'm wondering, it's great. I think I really like that sentiment. But just because a leader encourages and said, we want you to share, in fact, if you don't share, you're disloyal, is that going to put people necessarily in the mindset where they are comfortable doing so? So this takes us to this concept known as psychological safety. And I would like us to kind of think about defining this, what it could mean for ourselves. So to help you do that, think about a time when you were with a group in a space where you felt comfortable sharing your ideas and your thoughts. Okay. And now I'd like for you to think of an example of a time when you did not feel comfortable sharing and bringing your full self to the group. So what are the differences between those? And if you want to share some keywords in the chat, please feel free to do that. And I'm kind of interested in what my fellow panelists might have to say about what would put you in a space where you feel comfortable sharing or in a group where you do not.
I have an example, Greg. When I was at another company years ago, I was starting my job there. I was new. And when I started, you feel lonely. You don't have people, friends at work. And I had gone to the cafeteria, and there was a group of people from another team that saw me going by myself, and they invited me to their table. And since then, they became my friends at work. And throughout the years that I was working with that organization, they were my lunch buddies. And they had a habit of doing that whenever they saw someone alone walking into the cafeteria, and they went so far as to find newer employees because they know how it feels. They would invite them to have lunch with them. I thought that was, what a classic behavior of inclusion that made me feel comfortable with them and feel that I belong somewhere.
Nice. And I would have definitely invited you to have lunch with our table too, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Anybody
And Greg,
else? Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to share that when I was working with a new group, it was a collaborative group that not within my own agency. I was a little nervous going in, but what created psychological safety for me was the feeling that I was affirmed when I did start making even small suggestions. And then when they said, "Oh, what I heard you say," and it sounded better than I know it sounded when it came out of my mouth, but it really made me feel safe just being myself and sharing with the group my ideas.
Nice. Yeah, that can be very empowering, Leslie, if somebody takes your own words and then reiterates it back to the group just to ensure that understanding. Not only did they hear you, but they really understood where you were coming from. And that's a great way to get that synergy of the team going. People can build onto those ideas and in the end come up with a product that would be much greater perhaps than individual ideas by themselves. Thank you for sharing that. Terry, do you have one?
Yeah, I have a story to share, but it's not so positive as Carolina or Leslie's. And this happened to me many years ago when I was working for an organization before coming to the state. And I'd worked for that organization for a number of years, but was joining a new team within the group. And on my first day, first meeting with everybody on the team, I remember somebody looked at me and then looked at our boss and said, "Why do we even need somebody with Terry's skills on our team?" And that just made it really hard for me to ever feel like I could contribute to that team.
Wow, I am sure. I mean, that would have lasting ramifications. So thank you for being brave and sharing that. I have one kind of in a similar vein. I was also new to in a new position and to a team, my first meeting, and everybody had been engaged up until the point where it was time for me to share. And this one individual did this, pulled out their phone and started texting. So I found it really just distracting to even like think what what I'm sharing when they're doing that. And yeah, it did not lead me to feel like I was really included. So when we're in meetings, we're not going to remember necessarily everything that everybody in the team says, but we do have a tendency to remember how everybody makes us feel. So with that in mind, we do have a actual working definition for psychological safety that goes beyond how we're feeling about it. And that is the shared belief that it is safe to engage, discuss ideas, experiment, take risks, give feedback, and learn from our mistakes. And I wanted to point out that while the idea of the definition is the shared belief, I think it really goes to the behaviors that everybody on the team is exhibiting. And everybody has a responsibility to exhibit that helps to create an environment like this.
And you know, Greg, as I look at the picture that's on the screen right now, I see some of those behaviors being modeled for us. You know, you see two people, they're in a social setting, maybe at lunch together, but they're not distracted by the comings and goings of other people nearby. They're focused on each other. They're paying attention. They're listening. They're making good eye contact. And it's some of those behaviors that let folks know, yeah, maybe it is safe for me to share here.
Absolutely. And with that definition in mind, I've got a story that actually goes back to the beginning of the pandemic when, across the entire all agencies across the entire globe, organizations were looking at how can we adapt to the changing needs in the workforce to keep people safe. So our IT department was looking at how they could quickly provide the logistics support so that employees could begin working remotely. And one of the big issues was not that we didn't have the equipment, but how are we going to get the equipment to everybody's house? Well, one of the employees that was in the meeting had been to IKEA and they'd been doing, I guess, some serious shopping. They filled up an extra large, super strong IKEA bag. It's reinforced and it holds quite a lot. And they were thinking, an IKEA bag would be the perfect size to fit even desktops, monitors, and all of the equipment that employees will need. So he kind of went on a limb and suggested it. So this might sound a little crazy, but what if we got all the employees an IKEA bag and we could pack up their stuff to take home? And so that's what BWC IT department did to help ensure that we were able to safely get all of the equipment to everybody's house for setup to begin quickly working from home.
That is such a powerful example, Greg. And not only does it emphasize the importance of safety, and safety is one of the conditions that creates that psychological safety, but then also imagine how rewarding it was for that employee to see their idea put into action. And when we start to experience that, it's often combined or accompanied with a sense of belonging.
Having a sense of belonging is so essential to, psychological safety. They go hand in hand, and I would define it as, being a part of, as opposed to being apart from. And it makes me think of Carolina's example. I sense that you even smiled and still feel warm when you think about being invited to be a part of that group when you were a new employee and being and taken in that way. And when we feel like we belong to an organization, or a group, we want to give back to that group. And then going to work, we typically kind of feel happy because we belong to something that's greater than ourselves, and we're able to give to that. And it helps to counter that culture of silence we talked about earlier.
So we've also provided a formal definition of belonging, and it connects perfectly to what Leslie shared in terms of the experience of being wholly accepted and included by those around you. So as we start to think about what specifically can we, or what specifically does psychological safety look like and some of its benefits, let's consider a few of these statistics. So one report let us realize that happy people are 31% more productive and 3 times more creative. So when people are more relaxed, they're feeling like they're contributing and they're part of what's good around the workplace. They're in on things that it boosts their energy. They're naturally more productive versus just running around trying to wrap up loose ends and multitasking. More importantly, it's this creativity, because when people are feeling like they're contributing in a valuable way, then their ideas become springboards for others, and it gets us to that point of synergy where we're building something greater through all of us than one person could accomplish on their own. And then consider this statistic. When we take a look at psychological safety from the standpoint of how does it benefit the team as a whole, you start to recognize that teams are, as a whole, are now 12% more productive. And that's different than the 31% we talked about in the other slide. But, at that one, we were looking at the individual level, where now we're seeing that as that psychological safety becomes present in the whole team, that the whole team starts to see an increase in productivity. In addition, there's a 27% drop in turnover. So consider the time that's saved with exit interviews and posting jobs and going through resumes and onboarding new people. You're keeping your great talent and that knowledge and that experience and those connections. And then finally, when teams work with a place of psychological safety present, there's a 40% reduction in all safety incidents. So our people at BWC really appreciate these reductions, but we're thinking beyond physical safety and seeing increases in terms of the connectedness and the collaboration together. So let's look at some additional benefits that come from psychological safety. And you'll see these in your learner guide on page 5.
Of course.
Carolina?
Yes. One of those benefits is increased innovation. And this is connected to what we're trying to work in diversity and inclusion across the agency and across the state. Innovation comes from diversity of ideas, and having those ideas in an environment that creates that psychological safety allows for that innovation and problem solving to occur. Teams that feel safe are more likely to innovate and collaborate with their peers, and increases contributions to engagement and engagement with the customer. Better reliability and performance is another of these benefits. Team members can share what's going well and what is not working. We do want to have an environment where people trust that they can share when there is a problem. So those problems can be detected and addressed immediately when they come up, where we can celebrate success, and that where we can work with our differences and produce that synergy around the teams. And there are other benefits, Leslie.
Yes. At the Employee Assistance Program, we often get calls about stress related illnesses and just stress at work overall. So when we have psychological safety in the workplace, it can contribute to a healthy mental state for each of the individuals, and then collectively for all individuals. Um, they'll feel less stress at work and they'll be able to work better. And what this has also shown is a higher retention rate. And I recently was working at an agency or meeting with people at an agency where I noticed several employees had worked 35 years at that same agency. You don't see that too much anymore where someone stays that long. That has got to have, that agency has got to have a really good safety system, psychologically healthy and productive.
Yeah, that's a great point, Leslie, that when you've got people and multiple individuals who stay their entire career in one place, that says a lot about that organization and their reputation. And so when psychological safety is present in a workplace, people feel like they get to contribute to things. They feel in on things. They see their ideas put into action. And that gives them a sense of pride about that. And you hear it reflected in terms of how they talk about their organization. They're willing to recommend their organization as a great place to work. Additionally, you see improvements in performance. People know what they need to do. They know when it's due. There aren't a lot of questions about why is this happening, and instead, people can smoothly go about getting their work done, contributing to accomplishing goals. And maybe they've got a little bit of extra time. They can help somebody out who might need an extra hand. Hey, Greg, can you think of any other ideas?
Well, what about the connection to diversity, equity, and inclusion? I think having a diverse group is really helpful because each member is also representative of all of their experiences, their demographics, represents others from their organization and even larger customer base for the organization. So having diversity is important, kind of gives representation to everyone within their unique demographic mix. And also the last one on the handout talks about increased happiness. And Terry, you showed us there's value in that. It's measurable on our return on investment. So yes, that's an important one. I think when we talk about the return on an investment, what is going to be specific to the goal of the team. So psychological safety in and of itself is not the end goal, but it creates the environment for the focus of whatever the team is working toward, whether it's a process improvement or how can we provide a better experience for our customers. That is the end result. And psychological safety is the environment where people feel comfortable contributing so you can have those successes.
Yeah, that's a rich point that it takes time to achieve that level of psychological safety, but everything I do day to day makes a difference. And so I have to think with intention, how do I want to show up? How do I want to contribute? And that sets the stage for our first self-reflection. So if you turn in your learner guide to page 6, you will see some prompts there and some space for you to make some notes to yourself. In a moment, we're going to have the video pause so you can think for a moment, put some ideas down, but also contribute to chat. Add your ideas in there so we can so you can exchange ideas with each other. So what are you thinking about here? Well, we've been talking about it takes some work to enable a team that works from a space of psychological safety on a consistent basis. And some of that's recognizing how our conversations go. So first off, I want you to think about conversations in your workplace that go smoothly. What are those topics? Where does everybody just kind of willingly jump in, share ideas? They're not holding back. They're not worried about saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. time. And that might be, where are we going to order lunch from? But it could also be around, what are new ideas for how we provide services to our customers? Can we make improvements to this job aid or our website so it's easier to use? Then I want you to think about, are there any topics where people are reluctant to have these discussions? They hold back, they avoid for as long as they can. And then finally, are there any conversations that are avoided at all costs, that people put off having these conversations? They're drugged into the discussion with their feet, dragging and kicking and such. So what are those conversations that need to be had, but people try to avoid? So take a few minutes, add your thoughts to chat, and we'll be back with you shortly. All right. Thank you very much for contributing to chat. It's great seeing the ideas that come in there. We're going to begin to think about, despite our good intentions, what could trip us up? What can make it a challenge to create that psychologically safe workplace? And we're going to share, first off, 5 traps that could trip us up. And then we'll share 3 tools that can help to clear the traps. And all this information is shared with us via a researcher by the name of Jacob Goldstein. So the first of the traps is the mind reading trap. And the mind reading trap is what I fall into when I make an assumption of, oh, I know what they're going to say if I ask this question, so I'm not going to ask. I just work from that assumption about what that person might be thinking, what they might be feeling, what their experience is, and I never have a conversation to make sure that what I assume is going on is really their experience. And so not only am I working with incorrect data, I'm also making it a challenge for them to ever really feel like they're fully heard. So the first trap is the mind reading trap. Hey, Leslie, what's the next trap?
The next trap is the me trap. This trap is sort of a personalization trap. It's a little different than the mind trap. This is when, as a part of a group, I begin to feel like I am the reason that something isn't working. If we're trying to draw a picture, it's not coming out right and it's my fault. I'm the cause of the bad business that's going on. This trap is usually a result of insecurity, and it does decrease psychological safety for the individual who is feeling like whether it's a rainstorm that occurred on the day you were supposed to do something is your fault, or everything that the group has done that didn't go well or as you expected is your fault. It breaks down the psychological safety for that individual as well as for those in that work group.
I've got one kind of the opposite of that, Leslie. This is the them trap, where rather than taking any of the responsibility for what might have went wrong, you're pointing to somebody else. So this picture in particular, I'm just thinking if this is actually team members finding fault with one person and placing that blame, that's really going to undercut the trust and any psychological safety that was on that team. So even if the team is intact, but the blame is assigned to another team, another department, another division, that's really not helpful moving forward. It can be responsible for creating defensiveness among the different groups. It can create silos within the organization and really setting you up for less cooperation to work together to find solutions for future success.
Yes, Greg, imagine, when there is a problem and you are trapped in the them trap, who's going to want to come up with the problem, or even share that a problem exists when you know there's going to be the blame game going on. That is really important. The next is a catastrophizing trap. This is a hard word for me. And I need to confess that I fall victim of this trap. And it is a trap when you see one problem and you begin to imagine everything that can go wrong, and you go step by step, and it becomes like a snowball in our mind, thinking how the problem can get bigger and bigger. In this, we spend time and energy ruminating over these outrageous possibilities, things that might happen or can get worse. Imagine, you make a mistake and you think that you're going to have a bad performance review, and then you imagine that your job is going to be at risk. This is difficult one, and can occupy our minds for a long time, getting us away from finding solutions. So this is a difficult. What's the next mind trap?
So the next mind trap is the helplessness trap. So this trap raises its ugly head when we start to believe that we have no control in changing the situation that we find ourselves in, that we think that there's nothing we can do to make a difference, to find a new alternative, to see a new way forward. And instead, we just get bogged down by this cycle of thinking that there's nothing I can do that makes a difference, that my contributions don't even matter. So the 5 traps that we've talked about, the mind reading trap, the me trap, the them trap, the catastrophizing trap, and the helplessness trap, each of these can work to upend the progress that we're trying to make in creating a team that is psychologically safe. It can trip us up and make us feel that we're not making any progress. And these 5 traps, they could happen one at a time. And, who knows, they might even happen in tandem sometimes. So, it's important to keep ourselves aware of these traps. And if we see ourselves sliding into them, finding a way to change our behavior so we can do something different. So that something different can be via a set of tools that we offer to help you clear the traps. So, Carolina, what's the first thing I could do to get back on track?
Well, there's a few things. One of the first one is being aware, becoming aware. Find a way to identify when we fall into these traps and seek evidence. When we're beginning to fall, we can go and approach a situation like a scientist and look for evidence that to stay grounded. In this solution, we can look for the objective element of what happened. Find relatable and compelling and concrete evidence, either to support or to disprove whatever, it's our mindset at the time or what we're thinking. Challenge your assumptions, come from seeking evidence. These also help us with our cognitive biases. I teach a class on cognitive bias, and one of the solutions that, we approach there is also finding evidence. They can be counter to confirmation bias, because in confirmation bias, we look for, only the things that are going to confirm our assumptions. Here, we're seeking evidence to the contrary.
Nice. Once we seek evidence, Carolina, perhaps we could reframe the situation. That's our second reframing, and that's the ability to view the situation from a different perspective. And we're doing this in an effort so that we can find a more helpful way to respond to the situation. Probably the most common, everyone's familiar with the framing of, is the glass half full or is it half empty? situation's the same, but how are we looking at it? So within a team culture for psychological safety, perhaps the team has come to the idea that disagreement and conflict is a bad thing. So if somebody has shared something, I don't really disagree with it, I might not feel comfortable opposing that or sharing something additional. So you could reframe that idea of disagreement that it is a positive thing. Some conflict is positive because we want to have different ideas. We want to have a discussion. We want to find the best combination of results to move forward with how we're going to deal with this particular situation. So if we are able to reframe that as a group, and how we deal with the conflict, how we deal with the disagreement is going to be important. And those are those behaviors that we want to put into place to help people feel safe in doing so. But that's an important reframing for that particular culture to be more successful. Going back to the them trap I talked about, we could look at how we view errors. Rather than playing the blame game and being quick to call someone out, we could reframe that as an error as an opportunity to have a discussion, to find the best way to proceed to fix it, and to reduce the risk that it's going to continue to happen in the future. So from something to blame, it's an opportunity. How can we move beyond this as a team? And then I think even sometimes mentally for ourselves, we might need to reframe our own role on the team. So if we come in, we might feel intimidated as a new member of a team. We might say, I don't have as much experience. I'm not the official leader. I'm not a subject matter expert, but you're part of the team for a reason, because again, you have a unique experience and you're a unique individual with perspectives that nobody else has. Maybe you're the only one who's been shopping at IKEA lately, and that's going to make all the difference in what you have to contribute. So remember that everybody has their own unique perspective, and you represent others in your organization and in your customer base, so it's a value. There's a quote from Edith Cooper. She is the director of Goldman Sachs and co-founder of Medley. And she says the most powerful learning comes from hearing perspectives of those who seem most different from you. So I was thinking when we reframe that, that can be helpful to reframe for our own purpose from being on a team.
Yeah, I like that quote that you just shared, Greg, and it all goes back to, in my mind, to a sense of belonging. When we have that sense of belonging, it is going to create the psychological safety we need to be more successful in our jobs. So whether you're seeking the evidence or reframing situations, as Greg said, everyone is bringing something different to the table. The last of those traps is kind of a group thing, because you can seek evidence and reframe the situation. But as a team, we can begin to plan, because now we have accepted these opinions that are different. So we can begin to look at the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and then the most likely scenario that can happen. And we can plan for each one of those. So we can make use of those opinions that aren't all looking alike. And it just gives us a broader range to be more creative. Because even something in the worst case scenario, we may decide we want to use that in some way, in a positive way, in our best case scenario. So it really gives us a lot more to work with, because we're working together and not at odds with each other, because we feel safe sharing who we are, our own experiences. I've never been to IKEA, Greg, but I'm thinking I might go there, just because you have shared that story and how useful it was. And that's what it's all about, in my mind.
I like those those tools. I think they're very valuable. And one thing that I noticed while Carolina, Greg, and Leslie were sharing is these 3 tools, they help to keep our brain in the game. They help to keep our minds clear, help us to be focused on others and the perspectives, the information, the data that they have to share with us. And that's really the core of creating that psychological safety where people feel comfortable trusting each other. Then over time, that sense of trust builds because we understand people better. We know what to expect next from them. And we have that sense of connectedness that enables us to feel like we belong together. So as we move into our last section here, we're going to continue to ask you to contribute your ideas and your thoughts via chat. We really appreciate that input. And here in this last section, we're focusing on what are the specific things we could do to enable to belong ourselves to the groups that we're members of, but also to ensure that others feel like they also belong. So add your ideas in there so at the end, we all have one well-rounded, robust list from multiple perspectives. So as we get started on page 14, thinking about this, what does it take to enable a sense of belonging? One of the things I've noticed as we've shared here is the importance of communication. You know, that not just am I sharing my ideas well, am I articulating things in a way that others get them, but it's also the how that I do that. Am I doing so in a manner that's paced and measured? Am I paying attention to others? Am I sharing information and actively listening at the same time so that people feel that we're having an exchange, not that they're hearing things in a one-way fashion? And that active listening gets a boost when we use great nonverbals, so we nod, we smile, we encourage, we frown when it's appropriate to the story, we make great eye contact on a consistent basis. And then we also do some paraphrasing. So when I'm paraphrasing, I'm restating what somebody said, but I'm putting it a little bit in my own words to demonstrate that I get it. And at the same time, as I say the verbal message, I'm also including my nonverbals that parallel their emotions. So people know that I get things with the intent that they are sharing them. So that's just one way that we encourage that sense of belonging. How about others? What are your ideas about how we enable that sense of belonging?
Giving credit is one of those. When somebody has a good idea and brings it up front, even if it is a dissent, give credit because it can help us see things from a different perspective, and that can can help a team raise to a challenge, overcome an issue, and serve better. Especially, we saw that successful teams that were able to face the challenge of the pandemic were those who had different ideas on the table. We were challenged big time during the pandemic, and we're still being challenged. Amplify other voices, encourage people to speak up, like the Netflix CEO, encourage people that it's okay. Everybody, if you have the opportunity to lead a meeting, encourage the opportunity. What do you think? Is this a good idea? Is there something different on the table? Make decisions together. Ask the additional question and build each other up. That is another one, another way to build belonging.
Yeah, I agree with all of those. They're great. I would say be aware also of your nonverbals. Sometimes just a nod, eye contact, a pleasant expression on your face can go a long way to encourage people to continue to share. Remember that leadership, that being a leader is a position, but leadership is an intention that everybody can exhibit and everybody can contribute to on the team. And finally, that it is an ongoing process that depending on whether you're new member to a team or you've been on the same team for many years, it's a process and there's a continual learning curve that goes on, and that impacts that psychological safety. So it doesn't always happen overnight, but it's everybody continuing to provide leadership for the group to move that forward with appropriate behaviors.
And I like to I like to think that honoring everyone for being fully present and participating and even dealing with their own mind reading or me issues by showing appreciation. It's not easy. It's not easy. And showing appreciation and thanking people for their contributions, whether it's a dissenting one or one that is in agreement with the majority, but mostly just for being there and being a part of the process.
Yeah, those are wise words, Leslie, thinking about the importance of showing that appreciation. That, we know that it takes effort to bring our best selves to work every day, but by putting forth that effort, being consistent, being patient, enables us to create those teams that we're happy, we're proud to be part of. So that being aware of what others are expressing, showing credit for their ideas and giving them a try, being willing to put their ideas in action, reminding ourselves that it's a process, that creating teams that trust each other and are willing to put those ideas in action. They don't happen overnight. And it takes consistently contributing and being willing to be patient with each other that creates that sense of belonging. So as we cycle into the concluding moments, you will see on page 17 that there is a space for you to put your own actions that you're ready to put into play. So think about the ideas you've heard, the experiences that have been shared, and what do they mean to you? Which of those are interesting that you think might be helpful to you, both on a day-to-day basis and when you're trying to make new connections with people, when you're trying to intentionally contribute to a psychologically safe workplace that enables people to feel like they belong to something bigger than them. So make some notes to yourself about what are you ready and eager to put into play right now. Maybe what needs a little bit of preparation, but you can do that within the next 30 days. But also keep an eye on the future and think about new horizons, new opportunities. So I want to conclude by showing appreciation for this planning team. Carolina, Greg, and Leslie have been awesome partners, and they've been very wonderful sharing their thoughts, ideas, and expertise. And I really appreciate them making time to be part of this session. And then I also want to thank you for being a part of the conference and attending this session, and hope you found something valuable. This is concluding the video section, but we encourage you to continue to add ideas to chat, and Leslie and Greg will be on hand so they can answer questions that you might have as you might have identified as you go along. So thank you again and enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Thank you.